of government corruption in the United States had stretched back much further than most Americans realize. When people hear the word corruption, they often think of modern political scandals, televised congressional hearings, or headlines dominating today's news cycle. Yet the historical record tells a far older story, one that begins before the United States even existed as an independent nation. Long before the FBI, the CIA, and Watergate, or the Great Depression, governments, corruption, and political elites were already competing for their influence, power, and wealth. Now, some of those actions were entirely legal under the standards of their time, while others had resulted in criminal investigations and public outrage and lasting reforms. In this documentary, we're traveling through more than a century or half of documented American history to explore some of the nation's earliest and most influential political scandals. We'll examine how patronage, bribery, insider deals, public land fraud, corporate influence, and political machines had shaped the United States during its formative years. Just as importantly, we'll explore how these scandals sparked demands of transparency and accountability and reform that continue to influence American government today. This isn't a story built on rumors or speculation. It's based on a documented historical events, congressional investigations, court proceedings, and the work of historians who have spent generations studying America's political past. Whether these scandals involved elected officials, powerful businessmen, or political organizations, each offers an important lesson about the balance between power and accountability in democratic society. So, if you're ready to travel back through the earliest chapters of American political history and discover how corruption and the fight against it helped shape the nation, then let's begin. For many Americans, government corruption feels like a modern problem, but the history paints a more complicated picture. From the earliest colonial settlements to the explosive growth of the 19th century, Americans repeatedly confronted the accusations of favoritism, bribery, abuse of public office, and conflicts between private wealth and public services. While the United States has also built strong institutions and designed to investigate the wrongdoing and strengthen accountability, those safeguards often emerged only after major scandals expressed weakness in the system. Our story begins long before the Constitution was signed. Before there was a United States, the American colonies were governed under the authority of the British Crown. Royal governors and colonial assemblies and powerful merchants all competed for influence and political appointments, frequently dependent less on merit than on loyalty and personal relationships. The wealthy trading interests often received the favorable treatment from the government officials, creating growing frustration among ordinary colonists who had believed the system benefited the well-connected far more than the average American citizen. One of the clearest examples of this relationship between businesses and government was at the British East India Company, chartered by the British government. The company became one of the most powerful commercial enterprises in the world, while enjoying special privileges that many competitors did not receive. By the early 1770s, the financial difficulties prompted Parliament to pass the Tea Act, allowing the company to sell the tea directly in the American colonies while maintaining the existing tea tax. Although the Tea Act actually reduced the prices of tea, many of the colonists saw it as something much larger than a tax dispute. To them, it had represented the British government using its authority to favor one powerful corporation over independent colonial merchants. This issue no longer simply was about tea, it became a debate over the political power, economic fairness, and government accountability. However, that growing frustration had exploded on the night of December 16th, 1773, when members of the Sons of Liberty boarded British ships in Boston Harbor and dumped hundreds of chests of tea into the water. The Boston Tea Party became one of the defining moments leading to the American Revolution, and while the conflict centered on taxation and representation, it also reflected on the deeper concerns about the relationships between government, power, and privileged economic interests, questions that will continue to appear throughout American history. After winning independence and adopting the Constitution, many of the Americans hoped that the new republic would leave behind the political abuses associated with the colonial rule. But creating a new government did not eliminate the possibility of corruption. Instead, the young nation soon faced its own challenges. One of the earliest major scandals had emerged in 1795 with what became known as the Yazoo Land Scandal. The Georgia legislature approved the sale of roughly 35 million acres of public land to private land companies at a price far below market value. And later, the investigations revealed that many legislators had accepted the bribes in exchange for supporting the legislation. And when the news of the scheme reached the public, outrage swept across Georgia. The citizens demanded accountability, and in one of the most dramatic symbolic acts in early American political history, copies of the legislation were publicly burned. And the controversy eventually reached the United States Supreme Court, which established important legal precedents while reminding all Americans that even their new government remained vulnerable to corruption. Our story now moves to New York City during the height of the Gilded Age. As America industrialized after the Civil War, the cities expanded at an astonishing pace. Millions of immigrants arrived seeking the opportunities, business flourished, and urban government struggled to keep pace with explosive growth. Into that environment stepped powerful political organizations known as the political machines. These organizations often provided the real assistance to immigrant communities by helping the families find jobs, housing, and basic services, and in return they expected political loyalty and votes on Election Day. The most famous political machine in American history was the New York City's Tammany Hall. At the center of Tammany Hall stood William McGeer Boss Tweed, one of the most influential political figures of the 20th century. And although he never served as mayor, Tweed exercised enormous influence over city government through a network of loyal officials and political allies. Under his leadership, the contracts for public construction projects were frequently awarded to favored businesses at dramatically inflated prices. The historians estimated that taxpayers lost tens of millions of dollars through fraudulent billing, kickbacks, and financial manipulation. Tweed's organization became so powerful that many believed it had controlled nearly every aspect of the city government, from elections and hiring to contracts and public spending. Yet the machine eventually encountered an unexpected opponent, in investigative journalism. The political cartoonist Thomas Nast published a series of illustrations exposing Tweed's organization, making complex financial corruption understandable to ordinary citizens. Combined with the investigative newspaper reporting, those efforts helped turn the public's opinion against Tammany Hall, and eventually Tweed was arrested, prosecuted, and convicted and imprisoned. His downfall demonstrated that a determined press, supported by public scrutiny and the legal institutions, ultimately could successfully challenge even the most entrenched political organizations. And while New York battled machine politics, another scandal had emerged at the federal level involving the United States Postal Service. Known as the Star Route scandal, the controversy centered on contracts awarded to private companies responsible for delivering mail across the expanding western frontier. Investigators alleged that certain contractors had secured lucrative government agreements through either bribery and political influence while dramatically inflating the costs. The scandal had reinforced the public's outcomes or the concerns about the government contracting and prompted demands for a greater oversight. Only a few years earlier, Congress had also generated widespread criticism through the Salary Grab Act of 1873. There were legislatures who voted themselves a significant salary increase and made much of it retroactive, effectively granting themselves a large bonus for work already completed. The public's reaction was swift and overwhelming, negative. Facing intense pressure from the voters, Congress had repealed much of the increase, illustrating once again how public opinion could force elected officials to reverse unpopular decisions. As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, America entered what historians call the Progressive Era. Now, reformers argued that the government needed stronger safeguards against the corruption and greater transparency and more direct public participation. Many of the cities adopted civil service systems intended to replace the patronage with merit based hiring. States introduced reforms designed to reduce the influence of the political machines, while the journalists, often called muckrakers, investigated the corruption in government and businesses. At the same time, massive corporations were transforming the American economy. Companies such as the Standard Oil, U.S. Steel, and the American Tobacco Company had accumulated unprecedented economic power. Their influence over markets naturally raised questions about their influence over politics, as well as the reforms feared that the concentrated economic power could translate into the political power, encouraging the lawmakers to strengthen antitrust enforcement and regulated monopolistic practices. Now, these debates continue to shape American politics even today. But perhaps no federal corruption scandal before the Great Depression captured the public's attention more dramatically than the Teapot Dome scandal during the administration of President Warren G. Harding. The scandal centered on Secretary of the Interior Albert B. Fall, who secretly leased federal naval oil reserves at Teapot Dome, Wyoming, and Elk Hills, California, to private oil companies without competitive bidding. In return, however, the Fall had accepted substantial personal loans and valuable gifts from businesses, executives. Although the investigators found no evidence that the President Harding personally directed the scheme, the scandal severely damaged public confidence in his administration and became a symbol of a corruption within the federal government. Congressional investigations had eventually uncovered the secret arrangements, and Albert Fall became the first former cabinet member in American history to serve time in prison for crimes committed while holding office. The Teapot Dome scandal reinforced the importance of transparency, competitive government, contracting, and independent oversight. Now, looking back across more than 150 years of American history, there's a consistent pattern that becomes clear. The specific scandals changed over time, but many underlying themes remain remarkably similar. The political patronage, conflicts of interest, weak oversight, financial incentives, as well as concentrated power had repeatedly created the opportunities for abuse. Yet the history also demonstrates another recurring pattern. The exposure led to major reforms. Investigative journalists uncovered hidden schemes, courts reviewed controversial actions, Congress had launched inquiries. Citizens demanded accountability, and our civil service protections had expanded. The ethics laws evolved, antitrust enforcement grew stronger. Although no democracy can completely eliminate the corruption, the democratic institution had possessed mechanisms that were capable of identifying the abuses and responding through legal and political reforms. The history of American government corruption is therefore not simply a history of scandal. It is also the history of self correction, and it reminds us that preserving public trust requires constant vigilance, independent institutions, a free press, transparent government, and an informed citizenry willing to hold the leaders accountable regardless of their political affiliations. As we've seen throughout this, corruption has appeared in many different forms throughout American history, from the colonial favoritism and land speculation to the political machines, corporate influence, and the federal contracting scandals. Understanding these events help us better appreciate not only the challenges the nation has faced, but also the reforms that had emerged in response. History cannot tell us exactly what the future will hold, but it can provide valuable lessons about the importance of accountability, transparency, and the rule of law. I want to thank you for tuning in to the Unfiltered Political Lens. We truly appreciate you taking the time to watch this documentary series. We hope it provided historical context and encouraged thoughtful discussions, as well as offered a deeper understanding of how government institutions have evolved over time. If you enjoyed this deep dive, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and sharing it with others who enjoy well-researched series on American history, politics, and current events. Your support allows us to continue creating long-form content that examines important issues through the lens of documented history and evidence. We appreciate each and every one of you, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode. And as always, we'll see you in the next one. Peace.